A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today at the ISAS Election Watch webinar series titled Identity Politics. Today, we are delighted to have with us the following speakers. Professor Sudhapal, former Professor of Political Science, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Professor Badri Narayan, Director and Professor at G.P. Pant in Social Science Institute, Allahabad. Professor Adnan Farooqi, Professor of Political Science, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. And Dr. Gilles Berniers, Carl Lowenstein Fellow and Visiting Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science at Amherst College, United States. Today's session is chaired by Dr. Ronojoy Sen, Senior Research Fellow and Research Lead of the Politics, Society and Governance Cluster at ISAS, National University of Singapore. Today's session will be live streamed on the ISAS Facebook page, and I shall now invite Dr. Sen to commence the discussion.
Thank you, Raghav. A very warm welcome to all the panelists and to the second panel discussion of a series organized by ISAS on the coming Indian general elections titled India Election Watch. India's general exercise will be held from 19th April to 1st June 2024, involving a potential 970 million voters. We began this series a fortnight ago with a discussion on whether the BJP and Prime Minister Modi's claim of winning 370 seats on its own and 400 with allies was a viable proposition or not. Today's topic, identity politics, in many ways lies at the heart of Indian politics and elections. In the 2014 elections, one of the more popular and talked about electoral slogans of the BJP and Prime Minister Modi was Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, which translates into development with and for all. While the slogan is still heard on occasion, in the 2019 election and the several state elections since 2014, what might be broadly called the politics of identity has been central to BJP's strategy of winning votes. This has been true for both caste and religion. The BJP and Prime Minister Modi have repeatedly said they're not concerned with caste politics and are in fact looking beyond it. Indeed, Modi late last year said in the context of the caste census that for him, the only four castes are the poor, the youth, the women, and farmers. In reality, though, the BJP has been extremely mindful of caste and social engineering in its electoral strategies. In 2014 and 2019, the BJP, especially in the Hindi belt, successfully crafted a winning social coalition of upper castes, its traditional supporters, the other backward classes of the OBCs, and the Dalits. In 2019, the coalition largely remained intact. In Uttar Pradesh or UP, which sends 80 members of parliament to the Lok Sabha, the BJP won a large chunk of the upper caste, non-Yadav OBCs, and non-Jatav Dalits. Unsurprisingly, the Yadavs and Jatavs constitute the primary voter base of the BJP's rivals in Uttar Pradesh, the Samajwadi Party and the Bahujan Samaj Party, respectively. Hindu nationalism, which can manifest itself in several different ways, is of course a central plank of the BJP strategy and has helped in consolidation of the Hindu vote in the past decade. In this election, this could play a bigger role, particularly in the backdrop of the opening of the Ram Temple in Ayodhya in January this year. For the BJP, this was a fulfillment of one of the core items on the agenda, and one that has figured prominently in the election manifestos for the past 3 decades. This was also the issue that propelled the rise of the BJP in the 1990s from a marginal entity to its current dominant status. The temple opening with full state backing and the Prime Minister occupying center stage and the intense mass mobilization around it was one more step in the BJP's and the Sangh Parivar's long-time goal of getting to unite a significant number of Hindus, cutting across region, class, and caste. The BJP has also been adept at using Hindutva to reach out to marginalized Hindu communities in the Hindi belt by using historical figures such as Suheldev or Gokul Jat and other appropriate cultural symbols. Along with the consolidation of the Hindu vote, there's also been a marginalization of Muslims, and the BJP has been quite successful at winning elections in the Hindi belt and elsewhere by marginalizing the Muslims. This has had a serious impact on Muslim representation at all levels. For example, if one looks at Parliament in the 16th Lok Sabha, the last one, the share of Muslims in Parliament was the lowest ever, having fallen to 3.5% at a time when the Muslim population was roughly 4% or actually more. The share of Muslims in the 17th Lok Sabha, or the outgoing Lok Sabha, was just under 5%, which was the second lowest proportion of Muslims MPs in parliament after 2014. This is arguably an outcome of the majoritarian politics of the BJP and is reflected in its election candidate selection. So in 2014, the BJP nominated 7 Muslims out of a total 428 candidates, which works out to less than 2%, and none, in fact, were elected. In fact, for the first time in India's history, the winning party in the general elections had no Muslims in the Lok Sabha. In 2019, the BJP nominated only 6 Muslim candidates. The story is the same in all the state assemblies where the BJP is in a majority. To discuss all these and much more, we have a very distinguished panel today. Each panelist will speak for about 10 to 12 minutes, followed by a discussion. Members of the audience can send their questions via the chat or the question and answer mode. And without further ado, may I now invite Professor Sudha Pai to speak, among other things, on why Dalits seem to have embraced the BJP, especially in northern India and the so-called Hindi belt. Over to you, Professor Pai.
Thank you, Professor Sen, and thank you for inviting me today for this very interesting talk. In my presentation, I will focus on the marked shift that has taken place in identity politics, more particularly in this case, caste politics in the 2000s. More specifically, as you said, I will look at the question why Dalits are shifting towards the BJP. I will look only at Dalit politics and not the OBCs because that would take too much time and would require perhaps separate treatment. So how do we understand the changed Dalit political landscape and why and how has Dalit identity politics undergone change in the last 1 decade, and particularly in the context of the rise of the right-wing hegemony? Dalit electoral preference in the 2000s has been different in different parts of the country. There is no pan-India pattern. Sorry. In West Bengal, the rise of the BJP does rely on Dalit support base to a large extent. In Punjab, although Dalits are a large number, they have not moved towards the BJP and continue to support the Akali Dal and the Congress party. In Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, following the decline of the BSP, we find that the Congress has gained a modicum of their vote. In Maharashtra, of course, it's divided between factions of the RPI, BJP, Shiv Sena, combined, Prakash Ambedkar's VDA, and the Congress NCP. In states such as Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, it's regional parties that have retained their support. And of course, in Tamil Nadu, parties representing Dalits and parties representing them are presently opposing the entry of the BJP into the state. So the way Dalit vote will affect the 2024 elections is different across states. And here I would like to look at UP because it's a key state and it's useful as substantial change which has taken place here has affected national politics since 2014. UP presents 3 scenarios in which the shift in identity politics is very clearly reflected. 1, the decline of the BSP under Mayawati and identity politics, which once shaped national politics. 2nd, the shift of a considerable section of the smaller non-Jata group, Dalit group towards the BJP, and its refined subaltern Hindu under Narendra Modi. And thirdly, the rise of a new leader, Chandrasekhar Azad in Western UP and other such small leaders in various sub-regions. So Dalit politics in UP is consequently facing fragmentation along class, ideological, and sub-regional lines, which is impacting on its politics. It is this triangular contestation and the intersectionality between various players, Maya, Modi, Azad, and now, of course, the India Alliance, and the possibilities all this presents, which is important for 2022. The reasons for the existential crisis of the BSP and changing identity politics lies in the interface, I would say, between 2 developments: a declining Dalit movement and rising Hindu. While undoubtedly there are failures on the part of Mayawati, expulsion and defection of senior leaders post-2012, which has led to hollowing out of the party, lack of any alternative ideology and strategy following the Sarvajan policy, organizational background, lackluster campaigning on her part since 2019 particularly. But longer term developments in the state and let's say perhaps in the Hindi heartland have played a very seminal role. Social and political change has been very rapid in UP, and the resulting shifts are reflected in changes within the Dalit community particularly. The impact of globalization is great in UP compared to states in southern Western India, and the weakening of identity politics beginning in the late 1990s led to a feeling of being left behind and a shift from a desire for social justice to heightened economic aspiration for material advancement. Simultaneously, the smaller Dalit subcastes in the backward regions have begun to enter the political arena and are experiencing cultural modernization. Consequently, there is today a new relationship, I would like to argue, between caste, development, and electoral politics that helps explain the decline of the BSP, the BJP's successful outreach to Dalits in a new form of inclusionary politics, as well as the emergence of new Dalit organizations from parties. But equally important are inherent long-term weaknesses within the Dalit movement in UP, which with the unraveling of the BSP have come to the fore and made Dalits highly vulnerable to the mobilization of the BJP. I'll just put this very briefly. Dalit subcastes have historically never been united. The consolidation behind the BSP in the 1990s of all these subcastes, of all subcastes, is only insofar as voting is concerned. Bhaujari identity and consciousness formulated by Kanchiram did not penetrate into all the subcastes. It remained an elite and not a mass phenomenon. So it's really the larger, better off Chamar Jatas were deeply influenced, while the smaller, poorer subcastes, for example, the Balmikis, particularly the more backward regions, subjected to Hinduization since the colonial period, have retained their subcaste identity. So today, rather than identity, it is important in defining and cementing relations earlier among Dalits. Today, social jealousies, cultural aspirations, economic anxieties are the driving forces. Hence, we have fragmentation into pro-BSP or Ambedkarite and the pro-BJP or the Hindu party Dalits, although on the ground, the actual divisions are far more complex. Second, there is a shift in the mid-1990s by the BSP from a radical movement to a competitive party to capture power. So as a result, downward mobilization of the smaller peasants, the parties, the Muthars, Valmiki in the backward regions did not take place, making them feel the BSP is a Jatov party. And it's precisely these groups that are today attracted by the BJP. Also, we find that the BSP was formed primarily to provide Dalits dignity, self-confidence, empowerment. Mayawati said so many times in the 1990s. It is not meant to be and is not a party equipped for providing an alternative economic agenda for Dalits. By the time Mayawati attempted her Sarvajan experiment in 2007, it was perhaps too late. The BSP suffered a crushing defeat in the 2012 elections. Dalit support dropped very sharply. A post-poll survey revealed the desire among them for expenditure on development rather than identity. Most were unhappy with the construction of materials of memorials for Dalit icons, and that funds would have been better spent on education, healthcare, roads, other facilities. Corruption and wealth amassed by Mayawati was another reason. But I think an important reason which showed the change in Dalit thinking was that Mayawati's victory had aroused more aspirations and expectations than could be fulfilled in the span of 5 years. It was this unhappiness with the BSP and the newfound confidence in the 2000s that explains the search by a section of the Dalits for a new party which would offer them economic advancement. So from 2014, the BSP got no seats we find, and Dalit politics underwent a profound change. It was under Narendra Modi that the BJP won resounding victories in assembly and national elections in UP. More importantly, successively gained increasing percentage of votes from the smaller subclasses. The aim of the BJP has been not only to defeat the social justice parties in UP and control the key states, but to bring them into the saffron fold to build a consolidated Hindu identity. And here two strategies have been important in Dalit inclusion. A new politics of recognition of their distinct cultural identity neglected by the BSP, which, as I said, they now view as a Jatov party. Second, you have the economic benefits offered by the BJP government or new welfareism as it's been called, in which bank accounts, cooking gas, toilets, housing, free rations, etc., have all been projected as a very organized, large welfare state, successfully creating a new kind of politics of redistribution and creating what have been called Labharti. But at the same time, the decision to shift towards the BJP is both very layered and complex, which is then reflected in electoral politics. So on the one hand, there is large-scale protest against atrocities, but this does not evolve into voting for Dalit parties or a successful Dalit politics. Rather than simultaneously assertion and integration. The political is dynamic, full of contradictions and protests, but the electoral realm is insulated from the political. So it's very complex. There is respect for boundaries with all leaders. Azad is found when atrocities take place in the countryside, but the vote is cast for the BJP. Does this mean that the BSP has outlived its foundational purpose and usefulness for Dalits? I would like to argue that the Dalit movement in UP has entered a post-BSP phase, a development which need not be seen in a negative light, as much has been achieved. The BSP has in great measure fulfilled its original promise of providing Dalit self-respect and contributed to social deepening of democracy. What we are witnessing is the maturing of the Dalit movement, with Dalits confident of making their own electoral choices, moving towards different parties, as so many other castes have. All this also explains why Mayawati is not joining the India Alliance. She feels the BJP will return to power under Modi in 2020 and the India Alliance is badly divided. Given this calculation and the weakened position of the BSP, if she joins the alliance, she feels the BJP and SP will take away much of her remaining social base, including perhaps her core Jharkhand constituency. So for her, it's a matter of survival of the BSP and the Dalit movement in UP. She would like to bide her time and keep the clock safe for another round of ascent. So I conclude by saying that while recognizing all the failures of the BSP leadership, it's important to understand that the Dalit movement today operates under the shadow of a hegemonic right-wing Hindu majoritarian party. Given the nature of identity politics in 2024, the multicolored electoral contest in UP will benefit the BJP. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pai, for sticking to time and giving a succinct summary of what you termed the post-BSP phase of Dalit politics. May I now turn to Professor Badrinarayan, and to dwell briefly on how Hindutva might have reinvented itself under Modi, and how, in turn, that might be reshaping Indian democracy. Badri, the floor is yours. You just need to turn on your microphone. Yeah, thanks. Oh no, it's got turned off again. Badri.
Yes. Now am I
Yeah,
audible? Am I
now
audible?
yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ronoje. And I'm very thankful to your institute for organizing this panel discussion. And Sudhaji already has created a context in which I would like to put my argument. The question that how Hindutva has reinvented. Actually, as I said, that the Hindutva politics is being reshaped from the discourses of the RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. And the entire argument emerged from there. And those arguments and the logics are being translated in mobilization by the BJP. And but this relationship is not very karikaran sambandh. It's very cause and effect or 1+1 kind of relation. It's a very it's a chemistry, creating a chemistry, because the argument which create from here, like Suhal Dev, RSS started working on Suhal Dev in 2002 or 2000, but it came in BJP politics after 14-15 years. So it takes long time from the emergence of the issue and coming to the BJP politics. It's not in that way. It's just just putting the hand on the switch. Second is the Hindutva is itself reinventing because of various other reasons, because of various kinds of international discourses, various kinds of Hindutva diaspora, influence of the Hindutva diaspora or Hindu diaspora all over the world. They play a very important role in giving the feedbacks to them. and they have a very strong network of feedback from the grassroots to the global society. So these feedbacks play a very important role in reinventing or reshaping the Hindutva itself. So Hindutva, as I see Hindutva, whenever we see Hindutva as it was in 20 years ago. But in these years, Hindutva has reinvented a lot and imbibe very new arguments, like you must have observed this transgender issues, various kinds of reaching towards Dalits. And in that process, they are changing themselves, they are changing their arguments. And so Hindutva has to change, because without changing itself, they can't reach to these peoples. And they can't be able to mobilize them, the huge population, which huge diversified population of Indian society. So, and this through this diversification, they invent various kinds of new strategies to reach to the communities. So micro strategies to reach communities. It's not the homogeneous. There are few homogeneous meta strategies, but they employ micro narratives and micro strategies. And through micro strategies, they influence the communities and bring them in their politics. Now I can see how they are. I'm going to explain you that they for the mostly the poor and marginal communities, they have their different ways to reach to them. The one way is beneficiary consciousness. About Sudhaji was talking beneficiary, and I used to talk about it. This beneficiary consciousness is very big thing, you know, and earlier identity consciousness based on the caste was very dominant in Dalit mobilization. But now what we observe that there is a emergence of beneficiary consciousness among various castes of the community, and and this beneficiary consciousness actually, you know, every party has whenever come in power, they create their own beneficiary. But BJP transform them in a communities, because they are in constant touch with those people through various organizing various kinds of festival with them, meeting, having sweets with them at the time of Holi, Diwali, distributing. So through various kinds of strategy of connection or process of connection, they emerge it as a community. And this community has transformed as a vote bank. And this community, this beneficiary community term, maybe there may be some disagreement about that. This beneficiary consciousness, which may be not it concretized in that way, works across the caste. You know, among Dalits, maybe Chamars, Jatos, they are also beneficiaries, and Muslims are also beneficiaries. So within Dalits, a new kind of identity mobilization, identity around a beneficiary, you can see. One can very easily observe in the field whenever you go there. So this is a one way to reach to this community. Second way is Hindutva, various kinds of providing dignity through religion and through religious spaces, providing them a space in religion. Like I have mentioned in my book, Republic of Hindutva, that how this Sangh, RSS, works with a smaller marginal community to provide them local temples of their local deities. Like if you go in Jayapura, is a village adopted by Pradhan Mantri Narendra Modi, or in Bundelkhand, various smaller bastis of the Kabutra, Nat, and Hari and Venrej. There they have as they had aspirations to have their own temple of the local deities, Agariya Devi, Agara Devi, so many devis and deities they have. And Sangh worked with them, collected chanda for them, and provided to try to fulfill this aspiration. So through this also, they reach to this community and provide religious space to them. And in that way, they try to get a kind of dignity. Muslims of Jayapura used to say there is a small temple there, one temple of the Sabri is there, you can find, and the Shiva is in one temple. And people from different part of the Eastern UP and Bihar come there to worship Sabri. And they used to say in the entire 50 course, we had no temple. First time we got a temple of our deity. And the same process, you can see, I don't use word subordination because this has another problem, but I usually say that the Hindutva politics is trying to incorporate all these small identities and converting them in bigger identity, and that is the identity of the Hindutva or Hindutvaness, you can say. And in that way, you can see this BJP started working on that line recently, but Sangh is working on that line since 30 years or 40 years, maybe more than that. But it's got visible when their processes are being documented by the newspapers, and we are getting information from those newspapers. So in that way, they reached to this community. Recently, you must have observed when Ram Janmabhoomi inauguration took place. If you go in the complex, Ram Janmabhoomi complex, you can find there is they are going to construct a temple of Sabri there, Jatayu, Nishadraj, so many characters of the Ramayanic story who are being linked with the marginal community. So this Ram Janmabhoomi is a complex which contains various kinds of identity and convert them in a larger Hindu identity in its impact or its symbolic meaning. And you must have observed that Pradhan Mantri Narendra Modi, before the inauguration, he visited different parts of India, and especially Kalaram temple, the Jatayu temple, the similar kind of a small characters of the Ramayanic history, subaltern, you can say, and trying to give a message that Hindutva is in that way. It's a new Hindutva, it's a changed Hindutva, and it is trying to incorporate all the smaller identities in a broader frame. So, this beneficiary and the gathering fragmented, fractured identity in one whole, and that whole is a whole of Hindutva, is a strategy of, or you can say the process of mobilization of Hindutva political movement in India. And you know, the major thing in that process, what Sudhaji already told, that decline of the Dalit movement, because you know all these icons which now BJP has co-opted, mostly they were invented by Kanshiram. But after Kanshiram, he couldn't maintain to keep them as their own political capital. And that political capital went in the hand of BJP via Sangh mobilization process. So it's a very complex process how BJP has evolved itself, or Hindutva politics has evolved itself. And even OBC, recently we were surveying the OBC youths in different district towns of Uttar Pradesh. And most of them are very happy that Ram Janmabhoomi temple, Pradhan Mantri Modi has played a very important role in the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, temple inauguration, because in that way they get satisfied their OBC identity. There is one person who is from the OBC community. He is, and PM himself told in Dubai that I don't know whether I am eligible to become a pujari or not, but I am a pujari of Bharat Mata. So that kind of communication is being received by the various caste identity in their own ways. And OBC youths are very happy that PM has done this kind of played a very important role in Ram Janmabhoomi movement. And Ram Janmabhoomi inauguration created a huge political capital for BJP, and this is visible and invisible, may play a very important role in this election, especially giving a space to BJP among marginals and OBC. I'm saying a very different thing, because most of the thing, mostly we see that because of this Hindutva religious mobilization, the BJP gets benefit from the upper caste and the Brahminic community, Brahminical community. But here I'm arguing to know this is giving space to Hindutva politics among OBC and the marginals. So these are the very two powerful tools in the hand of Hindutva politics. And in that process, you can say democracy means the including various kinds of social groups in their politics. And if you include someone, you will have to offer a space to them. You will have to share power to them. So now this power sharing is also going on. You must have observed the shift of BJP, political character of BJP. And even in some, you can find a lot of pracharaks from the OBC and Dalit community are nowadays in a sung. In Uttar Pradesh, I know the name of many of them. They are from those communities and they are pracharaks. They are Vibhag pracharaks of various positions they are holding. So this kind of shift has been started, and this shift is coming from the grassroots, top to grassroots and grassroots to top. And maybe not today or tomorrow, but it will change the entire character of the Sangh and the BJP itself. So it is a very it's a kind of a new chemistry, and it's a very organic process of incorporation. You can say co-option or whatever, incorporation, inclusion, and through that inclusion and incorporation, a kind of change is being taking place. Any word you can use, and this word may have different meanings. But here I'm just telling, if you are going to include someone, you have to change yourself. And that process, you can't remain aesthetic. You can't become freeze. You have to change yourself. And then through that process of change, the is going on. And this you can observe in their politics, either in the core politics or the politics of governance. These are things very, very visible. So now I think I have completed 15 minutes. I'm going to stop here. Thank you so much for providing me the opportunity.
Thank you, Badri, for those fascinating insights into what constitutes the new Hindutva. May I now ask Adnan to analyze issues around Muslim representation as well as the BJP's electoral strategies or outreach, if any, towards the Muslims. Over to you, Adnan.
Thank you, Ronald, for this invitation. And there's a lot of talk about the last two elections and how the Muslim representation basically dipped. But my understanding is that Muslim representation on an average has basically been flat, except for the two elections which happened in the year 1980 and 1984. Where Muslim percentage was actually closer to the population share, and partly that has to do not so much with the fact that parties are reluctant to basically nominate the Muslims, but more to do with the historical factors, the spatial factors, and the institutional. Historical, in a sense, like the partition basically changed the status of Muslims from a preeminent religious minority to a dispersed minority, where like pre-partition, at least Muslims were a majority in two larger provinces. Institutionally, first past the post system, basically in order to reach a plurality, if you are a minority everywhere, then you need to basically have a broad coalition. So you are more dependent upon the others when it comes to political representation. And that kind of basically worked against the formation or a failure of any pan-India Muslim political formation. Now, coming to more recent elections, 2014 and 2019, I think one broad pattern one can glean, and I think that began not in 2014 but 2009 election, which is basically, if one were to look at the Muslim representatives and the constituencies from which they have actually won. I mean, these were all constituencies where Muslims were in substantial numbers, and by substantial, I basically mean that above 40%. And so was the case with nomination by viable parties, that is, parties which had some standing, or at least had won an election at least won a seat at least once. So that is how, I mean, I would look at it. And so I think the real problem basically lies there, and that has to do with this change political dynamic one sees from 2009, where the elections also to a large extent became about management of ethnic cleavages, or management of this binary which BJP in its I mean during NDA one and NDA two and three was able to create between the Muslims and the others. What we are witnessing today is basically the culmination of a process which had actually started much earlier on. So on the whole, on an average, if one were to see, so there's, I mean, it's not so much about, say the percentages have dipped. It's more the question of where exactly they are being nominated from and where exactly they are being elected from. Like say in 2019, I mean, the voter turnout in the constituencies where Muslims were actually are in substantial numbers was high both amongst the Hindus and the Muslims. It was higher amongst the Hindus, and that's one of the reasons why the BJP actually ended up winning five such seats. And the other reason for the Muslim candidates not doing well actually had to do with the fact that the parties which have traditionally given seats to Muslims, uh, I mean, did not perform well electorally. I mean, whether one looks at Congress or one looks at parties like the BJP, the BSP, BSP, and BS and RJD in Bihar. The only exceptions were parties like Trinamool Congress, or for that matter, the Muslim-led parties such as AIMIM, IUML, and AIUDF. So these are the I mean, this is what I see, and I don't think that much would change as far as 2024 elections are concerned. But where the difference actually stems from is the fact that earlier parties did try to accommodate Muslims elsewhere. Like, say, for instance, if one were to look at Muslim representation in the Rajya Sabha, I mean, till 2014, Muslim representation in the Rajya Sabha on an average was closer to the population share. But since then, it has actually declined. I mean, it's around 6%, and that has to do with BJP's expansion at the subnational level also. And what you have now is basically both formal and informal underrepresentation in different political arenas. The other development is basically, as I see it, I mean, what one might see is basically increased ascendance of parties like AIMIM, uh, which has not so much to do with its electoral strength, but it has to do with the fact that if Muslims are only getting elected from the constituencies where they are in substantial numbers, then it provides a foothold to a party like MIM to basically try to outbid the other claimants of Muslim votes. And it's against this one also has to look at the question of outreach as far as BJP is concerned, which is basically an outreach to the Pasmanda Muslims. And I think that's an interesting development, because it's also a sign that, I mean, if BJP has to expand, and if BJP has to basically look elsewhere to compensate for votes it perceives that it might end up losing, then this actually provides an opportunity. And here one also has to consider the fact that there is this shift which has actually happened as far as Muslim political leadership is also concerned. And we talk about democratic upsurge amongst the backward caste, but amongst the Hindus, but the similar kind of a development actually happened amongst the Muslims as well. And so what we are seeing today is basically groups amongst the Muslims who belong to the backward caste increasingly becoming assertive. A lot of them are economically upwardly mobile, and they do see basically a gain if they were to join forces with BJP, and and I think there is very creative interpretation, in a sense, like the fact that much of the recent Paspanda outreach actually fits in with this BJP conception of a nationalist Muslim, because this new Pasmanda leadership is increasingly making a case that here are the groups which actually converted from Hinduism to Islam, and unlike what is the case with the Ashrafs. And so when it comes to, so they are actually nationalist to boot, and it does not basically come in the way of BJP's own nationalist agenda. So I think, and plus the party has indeed tried to basically co-opt these segments by providing them with opportunities. I mean, not only as part of the government, but also giving them tickets in substantial numbers as far as municipal elections are concerned. So as far as my understanding is concerned, I mean, things are not likely to improve as far as Muslim representation is concerned, but it's not going to become worse than what it already is. And this is something which has been there for long. What has changed is basically the what has basically changed, is the nature of competition. What has changed is basically the seats from where they are getting elected from, and what has changed is basically the reluctance of political parties to have issues pertaining to the minorities, and here Muslims as part of the political agenda, lest they be accused of minority appeasement. So I think that I mean that is how I would look at it. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Adnan, for that summary of where Muslim representation stands, and also dwelling a little bit on the BJP's outreach, particularly to the Pasmanda Muslims. Finally, could I invite Gilles? I know for whom it's an ungodly hour since he's based out of the US now, to ask him to speak a little bit on the OBC or the other backward classes support for the BJP, how significant that is, and also maybe dwell a little bit on the debate around the numbers. Where there's been some controversy about what are the actual numbers of OBC that back the BJP. Over to you, Gilles.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Narendra. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm very happy to be back among friends. Some of them haven't seen in a long time. So it's a double pleasure, really. So with regard to the relationship between BJP and OBCs, there are two essential aspects to that question. One is something that you have mentioned in your introduction, Ranajay, which is the fact that the BJP has increased its appeal and therefore support among OBCs quite substantially over the past few years, and Dalit as well, as Sudhapai mentioned. And the other aspect of the question is the question of political representation and the balance of power between groups, generally speaking, and particularly within the BJP. So if we look at changes in voting patterns across large caste groups, we see that upper caste support remains by far the most cohesive in favor of the BJP. So by and large, particularly in northern India, upper caste have been supporting preferably the BJP, and the cohesiveness of that support has only increased in recent years, and we have CSDS data to support that. Support among Dalits and OBCs is stronger, much stronger than what it was, but it's not as cohesive. And if you break down these large categories, you see that you have sort of different stories for different kind of groups, right? It is true that the BJP has been particularly successful in attracting support from non-dominant OBCs and Dalit, non-Yadav, non-Jatav, but they have succeeded in denting also into the core support base of their adversaries. So you see more Yadav voting for BJP. Now you see some segments of Jatav Dalits also voting for the BJP, but it's not as strong, of course, as other groups. And that's the result of a mix of macro mobilization strategy and micro mobilization strategy. And on that aspect, Badri Naren has explained that perfectly well. There's a young researcher, Avishek Jha, that is doing very interesting work on the micro-targeting of castes in northern India and UP in particular, to show how the BJP target specific groups according to local constituencies configuration, and sort of mixes both a macro and micro approach. But in my experience, and is that the diversification of the support base of the BJP is loosely but not entirely connected to the question of the diversification of political representation, right? So with regard to political representation, there are two observations that I can make. One is that since 2014, the BJP's electoral gain, wherever the BJP has gained power or consolidated its political base or political presence, we have seen an increase of representation in relative terms of traditional elite groups, mostly upper caste in the north, but also intermediary castes in other states. At the same time, the BJP has been winning a much larger number of seats, which has given it the opportunity to provide greater representations to a greater array of OBC castes, but in relative terms, in percentage terms, upper caste representation has actually increased. And this is where one of the source of confusion sometimes perhaps in the public discussion about this is that these two observations can coexist. You can have more OBCs elected on BJP tickets, but at the same time, the relative share representation of upper caste increases over time. And in fact, from 2014 onwards, in UP and other states in the Hindi belt, you see upper caste representation going back to where it was before Mandal, right? So around the 40, sometimes 45% mark within the BJP. And so the question that I ask is whether those changes in electoral performance and political representation lead to a change in the balance of power between upper caste and OBCs. And here the response to that question, I think, has to be nuanced. And it will somewhat vary according to the scale of observation that you choose. So obviously at the constituency level, you have more situations where individuals who come from groups that have traditionally or historically been marginalized get elected. There is obviously a strong perception of representation and political empowerment. But if you look at an aggregate picture at the state level and further at the national level, things tend to be more nuanced, right? There's a number of observations that I can make from here. The first one is that the BJP is not alone in making claims of caste inclusions. In fact, most political parties do. In Uttar Pradesh, the BSP and the SP have won single majorities in 2007 and 2012 by broadening their caste appeal, by broadening their array of representation of groups, even though they retain some sort of a core for their own traditional support group. The BJP followed suit by adopting features of its adversaries' strategy. Second, the configuration of representation among upper caste and OBCs also greatly vary, because when we talk about upper caste representation, particularly in northern India, we're really talking about the representation of two broad caste groups, Brahmins and Thakurs, that have somewhat, strong consolidated presence within elected assemblies. While as far as the OBCs are concerned, they are actually scattered and fragmented with a large number of groups represented, but that individually seldom gets more than, a handful of seats. And so one aspect of this question that tends to be overlooked is the fact that all those OBC groups that find now representation within the BJP do not form a cohesive ensemble, but are sort of in competition against one another for power and influence within the party and within, in politics, more generally speaking. And so you have, in a way, a state of fragmentation within OBC representation that you don't see among the upper caste, that sort of works in favor of sort of preserving interest and influence of upper caste, generally speaking. A third observation is that these changes, these claims of inclusion or these politics of inclusion happen at the same time as the growth of concentration of power within political parties and within governments. And at the same time as, the growing personalization of politics. Here, this is not something that is specific to the BJP again, but the BJP tends to exacerbate, those trends as it usually does. And so you have increased inclusion that is coterminous with increased concentration of power, which again reinforces the notion that inclusion does not necessarily lead to substantial shifts in the balance of power. I mean, it's an open question, right? What is the meaning of inclusion when political power is increasingly concentrated and personalized? Fourth observation is that these changes take place under a larger project of Hindu consolidation of Hindutva politics. Here, I have very little to add to what Badri had to say said on the subject. But there's an aim to promote cohesion among Hindus, a sense of collective self. Hindutva, however it reconfigured itself, or it has been reconfigured over the past few years, still does not constitute an egalitarian project. It still sort of preaches for caste differentiation, caste harmony, and the respect of traditional hierarchies to a large extent. And then finally, I find very often in these discussions that what we're really talking about is a UP story that gets conflated to the rest of northern India. If you look at a state like Rajasthan, for example, it never really had a substantial increase in OBC representation. The hold of upper caste representation in smaller Hindi belt states like Uttarakhand or Himachal Pradesh is as strong as it's ever been. Madhya Pradesh, also the hold of upper caste has not, necessarily been challenged, even if you have, a few major OBC political figures that have somewhat, emerged in recent years. And I'm always struck when I compare, the sociological composition of the BJP now with the sociological composition of the BJP in the early 2000s, how similar they are. At different scales, obviously, the BJP wins far more seats now, so it can do more than in the past, but it sort of caters to the same sort of combination of groups than in the past. And then just to finish, and since you've raised the question, Ronald Joy, I mean, about controversy regarding, the numbers, it seems to me that the controversy is less about the counting of caste than the interpretation of the results, the interpretation of the data. If you look at absolute numbers, yeah, sure, of course, there are more OBCs elected under BJP tickets now, but you also have far more people elected under on the BJP ticket than before. And so if you reason in terms of relative share, you see that you still have a skewed representation in favor of groups that, taken all together, represent less than 20% of India's population. And so, I mean, all this basically gives us a picture that is, somewhat nuanced. I think it's useful also to remember that caste never ever operates alone. I mean, my work on UP and the extension of that work to other states, shows that political recruitment within the BJP and other parties tend to be very elitist. So on the one hand, you have a certain diversity or heterogeneity of representation on the basis of caste, but on every other variable, including class, occupation profile, and so forth, you have a growing homogenization of political representation. So here again, we need to ask ourselves, what is the meaning of caste diversity when elected representatives tend to be selected in the same elite groups or elite segments of the groups that they belong to, and at the end of the day, do not entirely resemble to the parts of the population that they claim to represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilles, for your reflections on the OBC support for the BJP, which is increased, but you have given us a sort of nuanced view of how to interpret that sort of numerical increase and whether that coexists with actual political influence within the BJP. So now we can move on to our sort of discussion segment. I can already see some very thoughtful questions coming in. But before I turn to that, maybe I'll just quickly turn to this notion of subaltern Hindutva, which Professor Pai mentioned and might possibly be credited with having coined. And could you just sort of expand on that idea, and would you sort of link it in a fundamental way to the idea of benefits and beneficiary politics that both you and Badri talked about? I think you need to put on your switch on the speaker. Yeah, thanks.
Hindutva has been reconstructed, reinvented since Modi came to power. At least that's how I see it. Earlier, Hindutva was seen as an ideology which was largely upper caste and appealed to largely upper caste Hindus. For example, during the Ram Mandir movement of the 1990s. Now, I think when Modi is appointed as the head of the BJP and he starts the campaign for the 2014 elections, I think he realizes that there is a change on the ground in the sense that people are no longer only interested in identity, but they're also interested in material, benefits and so on. So how do you then attract the lower caste? His idea is quite correct that it still remains an upper caste party. They do, have large number of the upper caste among them, but they have succeeded in attracting a larger number of the lower caste, both Dalits as well as OBCs, and particularly the lower levels among them. So, Hindutva was made into what I have described as subaltern Hindutva. That is, culturally underwent a change. The BJP provided space for understanding and respecting and relating to the cultural identities of the smaller groups. That is, talking about how Sohail Dev, or how when Ram was in the story of the Ramayana, how Ram was in the forest, it was the tribals and the Dalits and the poor who actually helped him and so on, and therefore an attempt to bring them into the Hindu fold. Now there, I did use the word Hinduization of the subcaste, which has been going on for a long time. There's no doubt about it, right from the colonial period. But under Modi, it's become a more open political project. and which is then related to election politics with the idea of gaining their support. So, a subaltern Hindutva refers to the attempt to broaden Hindutva into a kind of ideology which provides space, respect to the lower orders and to bring them in. And this is something that has been attracting them. Now, when I did, in this book that I wrote, there are two questions that we took up, Sajjan and myself. One is this question of protest and preference. You protest against upper caste atrocities, but you vote for the BJP. Dalit atrocities do take place. So that is one phenomenon. The second, that which I didn't mention today because of lack of time, is this drift towards the BJP tactical, instrumental, or is it ideological? Is it only because there's no alternative? The BSP is declining, Modi's promised Vikas, and therefore for some time, as long as Modi is in a very strong position, you vote for the BJP. So you're attracted, but it's a tactical, instrumental attraction, or is it ideology? Now that's a very controversial subject. I would say that both things are operating on the ground. On the one hand, there are some who are doing it maybe for tactical and instrumental reasons, but there's an equally large number who are attracted by what we call subaltern Hindutva and who have been Hinduites for a long time. The Balmiki, there's a long section in the book on the Balmikis. And so these groups have entered into the Hindu. So subaltern Hindutva has played the role ideologically, culturally, in a new kind of inclusionary politics of the Dalits and perhaps some sectors of the OBCs as well into the BJP.
Thank
Of
you.
course, you said about the beneficiaries.
Right.
I would say that the two things are running parallel to each other. One is the cultural inclusion, and the other is the beneficiary of the welfare inclusion. It so happens that those who are getting large amount of this welfare are also Dalits because they are the poorer section. So I would say that the two are linked, but they also do run parallel to each other. And I'm also saying this because when we did fieldwork, the Dalits, when you ask them about beneficiary, the benefits that they are getting, two kinds of responses were there. The older generation were very happy with it. They said, we got this in the past from Indira Gandhi, we got benefits from various prime ministers earlier, and we are quite happy because we are poor, so we're getting free rations, we're getting housing, we're getting this, that, and that. But the younger generation said, we find it humiliating. We do take it because we are poor and because we don't have employment. We would prefer employment, opportunities, better education rather than free food. But there being no alternative also, there is no other party which will defeat Modi and which will come to power and give us these benefits. So therefore, we are forced, in a way forced almost to take them because we have to feed our families. So I think the two operate together, but they do have, I would think, a sort of an independent existence of their own. Being beneficiaries is, getting the benefits and being, voting for the BJP also partly because of the cultural, ideological, attraction that the BJP has for them, which has been there for long, but which has now increased because of the decline of the BSP and also because of the desire, as I said, for material advancement rather than merely social justice. Social justice is not gone, but it alone cannot satisfy let's say, particularly the younger generation of parents.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Pai. Badri, did you want to add anything, or should I just turn to a few questions that have come in from the audience, which are directed?
Whatever.
Okay, I think some of these questions are somewhat related. So let me just go to the question that came in first, which is addressed to actually you, Badri. And it's there in the chat section, but I'll read it out for you. So the question says, while you analyze the phenomenon of the BJP's cultural co-option of the numerous little traditions, there is always an eventuality of these traditions losing their autonomy or particularity when they get absorbed within a larger monolithic Hindutva abstraction. So the analytical lens is shifted from the ruling party to such peripheral communities. Why haven't we observed any robust resistance to a probable loss of their cultural distinctiveness? I guess the cultural distinctiveness of the little or the smaller or the marginal communities. Would you like to address that?
Should I respond?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good question. Actually, what we observe in doing working with these communities in the field, that there is a great urge among marginals to be incorporated, to get a space, whatever you call mainstream, you can call dominant, whatever. Every actually even dissent, which they do. This is not for doing always constant dissent. This is for subversion, a kind of culmination of dissent for a kind of dignified acceptance. And through this kind of processes, BJP or you can say Sangh Parivar try to include them by giving them dignity, sense of dignity. Dignity may have different meanings and different interpretations, but the way they think they are dignity, I don't see any robust resistance against that. People are very happy to join with that mega, or whatever you can say. There is maybe one of the reasons for that also because the political condition, because the power itself has its own create a condition in which the dominant narrative gets disseminated in the margins and then the deeper part of society. So power may be one region, but power not through the power of a state, but the cultural power, cultural hegemony, you can say. Like when the condition of Ram Janmabhoomi inauguration is created, you saw in villages, in the Dalit bastis, they gave feast to the people. They used to come and have and so various communities, they have their own deities traditionally. Like they are very happy with this integrating themselves with the Ram symbol, but it does not mean that they have left their symbols. Those symbols are with them. But this and they this entire game of creating is maybe not the right term. It's entire way to create a kind of narrative which can link your narrative with others. And BJP is, or Hindutva, you can say Hindutva politics, is very, very creatively creates the narrative. It's a kind of holistic narrative in which everyone comes and joins. It is like folk narrative. Like if you see the folk heroes, most of the folk heroes contest with each other. Like OBC hero, Dalit hero, they all caste heroes. They contest with each other in the folk story. But at the end, they all come as part of the same story. So the same story, creating a same story creatively, the way BJP and politics is doing. So these people, those who are like, they are very happy with the Sabri. Sabri, you know that traditionally the Busars claims that they are tribals. They are not SC. So and the Sabri comes from there, and now they are very happy with the integration of the Sabri with the Ram temple and giving a space in the complex, Ram Janmabhoomi complex. So I don't see any that kind of dissent, but it doesn't mean that they have lost, they have not retained their own heroes, own deities. Like in Bundelkhand case, where I mentioned that they have their own deities, like Agariya Devi, Agara Devi. You know, they are local deities. When they migrated from the tribal zones, forest zones, and came and made their bastis around highways, they came with their deities and they put their deities around the people tree, and they are the local deities. Now they saw that there is a huge temple of the Shiva of the Thakur's village. They aspired for their own temple of the local deities. And here Sangh, because secular politics does not give importance to religion in their political mobilization process. So Sangh appears and they give support. So in this way, they create a kind of, you can say, weave the carpet of various kinds of smaller identities, icons, heroes, and in one story, and that story is very much is a kind of weaved around the Hindutva meta discourse. So that's the thing.
Right. Okay. So we have a few more questions coming in. So the first one is addressed to both Zapai and Badri. So the question is actually there are two sort of linked questions. So I'll just read the question. So while the BJP and the wider Sangh Parivar has clearly updated and refashioned their discursive narratives vis-a-vis different Dalit subcastes, do you see a similar response from other political social formations like the Samajwadi Party, the Bahujan Samaj, the BSP, the Bhim Army, or even the Congress in terms of attempting to build a wider social coalition to counter the BJP's hold? And there's a sort of a linked question on the internal power sharing dynamics within the BJP's enlarged social coalition. So are there instances of conflict between different castes and subcastes that can potentially upset or disrupt the formidable social coalition that the BJP RSS has constructed in UP? And here the questioner is thinking of one narrative such as the hold of the Thakurs following the rise of Adityanath. So would you like to address these sort of linked questions? Professor Pai, Adriani, or even if Gilles wants to. Yeah. Okay. You want to go?
I think Sudhaji would like to respond, or I should respond to this question. चलिए मैं करता हूँ. Let me.
You can start.
Yes, then Sudhaji can go. First of all, what other parties are doing with this kind of social fabric, or using this social fabric for political mobilization. In our field work, we don't see that these parties have that kind of the understanding of the society, because BJP has a major benefit that they have some kind of organization who has a very small information about the grassroots changing aspirations and their cultural roots and cultural constructions. Secondly, BSP had that kind of inclination 10-20 years ago when Kanshiram was there. And in fact, Kanshiram, they have son learned many things from the Kanshiram, how to mobilize Dalits, especially using icons, myths, learned, or you can say interacted, or they have, when Kanshiram died, this entire cultural capital of BSP had been transformed to the BJP or the Sun. BJP is not like the Sun, I would like to say. So that's it, because this secular politics of secularism creates gives a lot of benefits and privileges, but also create a lot of problem of understanding society, because you wipe out the religion. You don't consider religion. You don't. And in India, most of the heroes, most of the myths, most of the icons are very much related with the epical stories, epical narrative, and epic has a roots in religion. So they lost lots of cultural treasure, which BJP has been privileged. Like in one of the rally, Pradhan Mantri Modi has talked about Mari Mai. Mari Mai is a local deity around Lucknow. And no political leaders know about Mari Mai, but Mari Mai has a very strong influence in OBC community, in entire our region. So this kind of doing cultural politics, I think BJP is very well trained in doing that. And others, I think, don't give importance, and they still see because of the social media, because of this giving caste representation, they will give symbolic caste representation, they will create social alliance. And BJP, on the other hand, creates social alliance through social chemistry, thinking various kinds of social chemistry together through culture, through icons, through politics, which Kanshiram used to do in his time. So here, I'm not going to touch another part of the question of the power, but I would like to say one thing. This beneficiary consciousness is eroding day by day the caste identity consciousness. But it does not mean that they are going to lose the caste consciousness. But in a electoral mobilization, beneficiary consciousness is hurting a lot. Like Mayawati, maybe this time, Jatos, you can find Jato, there is a movement among Jato also towards BJP. Because even Muslims, because we were working in a Muslim villages near Purpu, and in one of the Basti, when we started interacting with the poor Muslims, and in the beginning there was a Nawabs and the richer Muslims, they were all saying cycle, cycle, cycle. When we entered in the interior and they interacted with them, here they will vote to the Kamal, but don't tell to this thing to these people. They will oppress us. ये बहुत सताते हैं हम. So don't tell to them. Then you ask why you are going to be to Kamal. कहा ये चावल कौन देता है, राशन हम लोग कौन देता है? Who will think about us? At least they are doing something for us. So that kind of shift is very important. I think we need to understand this shift.
Right. And on the second question, Professor Sudapai, on the sort of internal power sharing dynamics and what are sort of sources of conflict between caste, subcastes can upset the coalition. And the example being the hold of the Thakurs, for instance, in say UP. Whether you agree with that?
Well, I think there's a larger issue in this, that there are two things happening. One is the changes that are taking place within communities. All communities are undergoing change, especially, of course, as the Greek just said, the smaller caste groups, they are, becoming more aware of their identity, their own caste groups, and they are rediscovering many things. So there is, on the one level, changes taking place within communities, and on the other hand, there is changes taking place within political parties. And I think it's against that one needs to see all this, because one is, of course, the example of the Thakurs. They feel that Adityanath has not looked after them, and they are up in arms against him because they feel that he has not given them the kind of position and place that is there. But that has also been felt by some OBC sections about Adityanath. That's also been felt by some of the Dalits who were promised a great deal when they voted beginning in 2014 for the BJP as such. So there are murmurings and rumblings, and which explains people moving from one party to another. Though, of course, a lot of it is due to the attraction of political power and so on. But it's also because of unhappiness once you enter the party. You think you're going to get a lot, but you don't get it. And so your aspirations are not really fulfilled. And you find that hierarchy is there within the party also. And so there is nothing very much you can do about it. One more thing I would like to say about the SP, and which relates to the earlier question as well as this one, is what Akhilesh attempted in the 2022 assembly elections. His attempt to create a sort of a Pichda union, bring together all the lower OBCs and make them feel that the others are not against them. So he wanted to emerge as the leader of the Pichdas. That is a sort of a post-Mandal phase in which it's not just the Yadavs who will rule, but he wanted to bring all of them. He succeeded to some extent then. But today, all these smaller parties have gone back to their own. The other thing I would like to say is that if you look at the social base of the SP and the DSP, it straddles both Hindu and Muslim support. So they need support from both the Hindus as well as from the Muslims, and that is how they have won in the past. For example, even today the DSP is given tickets to large number of Muslims, and the SP is also in the past and today given tickets to Muslims as well. Whether they win is a different issue. So there are differences within communities, and then there are differences within parties. So I think these conflicts are there, and we are seeing a lot of very rapid change that is taking place at both these levels. And I think that explains the conflicts. Open conflicts don't occur, for example, within the BJP, because it's a highly disciplined party. If you make too much noise, Adityanath will throw you out. So it doesn't come out into the open. But yes, there are great deal of conflicts which do take place within the BSP. I would like to say among the Dalits, You see, the formation of the Bhim Army, for example, Chandrasekhar Azad. You see, if he is asked why is he and Mayawati don't get on, he says he's the authentic Ambedkarite party. So now there is a search for the authentic Ambedkarite group and for the authentic Ambedkarite ideology. So there are differences between Mayawati and Chandrasekhar because he thinks that she has not looked after the ideology of Kanshiram and Ambedkar. She has gone after power, whereas he is really doing something. And then there are other smaller groups within UP who also feel that. So I think it's a period of transition where changes within communities are also reflected in conflicts within parties. I think I stop there.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Professor Pai. There's a question that's coming for Gilles, and I'll just read it out. So it says, regarding your last observation about the overlooked trend of an elitist makeup of political representatives in conjunction with increasing social heterogeneity, would you briefly elaborate on this trend and how and why this is taking shape across different states?
Sure. So, I mean, across India and across states, political parties all share the same incentives in recruiting candidates who are, self-funded, but who also have an independent capacity to mobilize at least, segment of the voters. And so competitive pressures, incentives to get into politics, the centrality of money, basically sort of all these factors combined create a situation where the cost of entry into politics is extraordinarily high, and it's increasing manifold election after election also. And so as a result, most parties or most major parties tend to recruit their candidates in the same sort of sociological pools. That is compounded by the fact that in many states you don't have, very deep sociological differentiation between political parties. I mean, if you look at the social composition of the Congress and BJP in Madhya Pradesh, it's not fundamentally different, nor is it in Rajasthan, and so forth. And so you have these incentives to recruit among elite segments of a variety of groups. There's also a uniformization of recruitment strategies, right? The recruitment of candidate is done according to local context, local circumstances, local demography, the local balance of power between groups, the local history of, maybe of violence or tension between groups and so forth. And so every party basically adopts the same strategy of identify which is the dominant group locally, and who within those dominant groups, we should select as their candidates. And so as a result, you have a very large number of seats where major parties' candidates are actually, pretty similar in sociological terms. And then they are also quite literally interchangeable because you see many of them, switching party affiliation from one election to another. And so transformation of party strategies, but also the context of competitiveness of elections, the cost of entry play certainly a role. And then, Ronojoy, if I may, I can take the last question from Prasanna on IMEM. It seems to me that so the question is whether the increase of popularity of IMEM among Muslims is impacting BJP's vote traction among Hindus. It seems to me first that the BJP does not need IMEM to build its popularity among Hindus. The way it builds support is it's a multi-pronged strategy that includes Hindutva, that includes caste, that includes welfare, that includes leadership appeal with Mr. Modi and so forth. And so IMEM remains, quite a small or marginal figure among it. The decision to exclude Muslims from representation within the party and among representatives in the BJP. It also does not proceed from, the fact that, okay, let Muslims have their own party, and I mean it's a different political project altogether. Something that strikes me though is the appeal of IMEM and the influence of IMEM as a voice of representation of Muslims in India is far greater than its actual political weight. Having followed IMEM's sort of attempt to expand in northern India, I'm struck by the size of crowds that Asaduddin Owaisi in particular gather. He addresses very regularly tens of thousands of people, but who may not necessarily vote for his party. I mean, in my work on Muslim electoral behavior in UP, I found that Muslim voters are as tactical, if not as strategic, if not as more strategic than any other voter. So they're not willing to waste their vote on a small party that doesn't have a vocation of winning elections. But IMEM's importance as a voice is absolutely considerable, especially since other parties, including those who still formally adhere to the idea of secularism, have sort of renounced on the idea of, giving a voice to Muslims, within their own formation.
Thank you, Gilles. Could I just ask Adnan maybe to also step in and address the question of the AIMIM, and it's sort of I think the question also hints at what the AIMIM also does to maybe Hindus may be consolidating in reaction to what they might see as somewhat more strident politics that Owaisi might be espousing compared to, say, the Congress or the SP.
I think I agree with what Gilles basically said about AIMIM, which is basically its ability to basically hit way above its weight, and which has largely to do with the fact that its attempt to discredit other claimants of Muslim votes, like basically exposing the fact that they are unwilling to take up stand on issues which are important to the community. But having said that, I think what AIMIM's presence does is basically not so much. I mean, it. I don't think it basically eats into the votes of non-BJP parties in a constituency. I think what it does basically is that the position taken by AIMIM, and especially Assad, uh, at some level leads to a further consolidation of Hindu votes for the BJP. That is what it does, because as such, it doesn't. I mean, I don't think. It majorly dents the prospects of other parties, uh, but it definitely, in a close contest, it leads to vote consolidation for the BJP amongst the Hindus. That I think that is what it does, because as far as Assad's popularity is concerned, I mean, definitely, I mean, he is quite a popular Muslim leader, and that, I think, to a great extent, has to do with his. The issues he's basically raising, which others are basically reluctant to raise or engage with those issues, and which kind of resonates. So even if when it comes to casting your vote, you would not want to waste your vote, but you would definitely give them a chance if there's an opportunity. Like, say, I think when it comes to AIMIM, largely we focus on Vidhan Sabha and Lok Sabha results. What we are not looking at is basically AIMIM making its presence felt in municipal elections, and I think that's significant, and that has a lot to do with the AIMIM basically trying to reach out uh, uh, to local Muslim leaders on the ground. So I think that's what matters. But whether or not it actually has an impact upon um, uh, basically Muslim votes, I don't think it does. But what it does definitely does is that it consolidates support for the BJP. I mean, that's how I would look at it.
And could I just add a quick question to add to that for you, Adnan? To maybe do a little bit of forecasting, which is always perilous. Do you see, I think the CSDS surveys for 2019 had said, I think the maybe 8% or so of the Muslim vote had gone to the BJP, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
But do you see this election an increase of that number, partly because of the outreach to the Pasmanda Muslims you talked about, as well as what Badri and Professor Pai was talking about, the beneficiary, the sort of the class of beneficiary voters, and whether some Muslims might fall in that category and actually vote for the BJP, or do you think that might not happen?
I think it's a distinct possibility. There might be a marginal increase as far as the Muslim votes are concerned in favor of the BJP, and that has to also. I mean, that to a large extent has to do with the kind of outreach the party has tried to make. Not only the party, but just like what it has done amongst the Dalits. I think MRM has certainly played an important role here, which is Muslim Rashtriya Manch, and especially the work MRM has been doing amongst the Pasmandas. And this is very different from the Pasmanda politics in the 80s and 90s, and it's more transactional. And plus, also there's a section which believes that BJP is here to stay, and you need to basically do business with it. And it's not ideology per se; it's pragmatism, which is basically dictating what they are doing. So marginally, I think. Yes, and I think there would be a great variation. I mean, when we say 8% of the Muslims voted, I mean, in the last two elections, there's intrastate variation. I think depending upon where they are located, the nature of political competition, I mean, that would basically dictate their political preferences and the choices.
So we are actually out of time, but could I just, there's a last question which I'll ask Professor Pai to respond maybe in half a minute. And the question is a big one. Do you think that the space for centrist politics will continue further shrinking in Indian politics? And I'll give you, half a minute to quickly respond to that.
Let's put it very briefly, because parties like the Congress are definitely shrinking, and they are not growing either organizationally, nor in terms of their leadership, nor in terms of their campaign ability or their ability to form alliances with others. So that is one part of it, that centrist parties themselves are in decline because their entire agenda of centrism, that is of secularism, etc., has been taken away from them, and they have not been able to defend it. They have in fact descended into soft Hindutva rather than they have not been able to defend it. The second is that the right is occupying so much space and has taken away a large number of voters who used to be voters for centrist parties. So therefore, the room for centrist politics is definitely shrinking. I would think that these are two aspects which are there. One could elaborate on them, but if you don't want me to go into detail, then stop.
Unfortunately, we are really out of time, but thank you for quickly responding to that large and important question. On that note, we'll have to call an end to this discussion, which we could have gone on. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the audience who not only tuned in but also sent in their questions. A very quick reminder that our next panel discussion is on April 17th and is titled Roti, Kapra and Makan. Do join us for that if you're free. And thank you once again to the panelists across time zones for joining us. A round of virtual applause. Thank you.